The first warning came as a ripple in the air above the human outpost on Velara Prime. Most soldiers thought it was just another dust storm, but Captain Elias knew better. The sky was too quiet. The wind carried a strange metallic taste. And then the ground began to hum like a living thing. The horizon split open with a flash, and ships unlike anything in the human database poured through. They were shaped like living blades, their hulls glowing faintly with alien runes. The war had come to Velara before anyone could prepare. Elias ordered his troops into defensive lines, but the first strike shattered the outer perimeter instantly. The enemy moved with elegance and cruelty, their warriors clad in gold and blue armor. They were taller than humans, their skin shimmering in shades of silver and blue, their eyes glowing like ice. The humans had heard whispers of the Zevrani Empire, but they had never seen them in person. Now the stories about their beauty and brutality stood before them in the flesh. One figure stood out among the attacking force. She moved with the grace of a predator, her blade leaving arcs of light in the air. Every soldier who tried to approach her fell in seconds. Her armor was heavier, her crown-like helm glinted under the pale sun, and her voice carried over the chaos as she gave orders in a language no human understood. Even in the heat of battle, Elias noticed something strange. Her strikes were precise, controlled. She was killing only when necessary, disabling more than she destroyed. The human reinforcements were too far. Elias had to decide whether to pull his men back or hold the line. Retreat meant giving up the colony. Holding meant facing her. His instincts screamed to survive, but something in the way she moved made him curious. She wasn't fighting like someone who wanted the humans gone. She was fighting like someone testing them. He stepped forward, signaling his soldiers to hold position. The alien queen, because that was the only word for her, noticed him immediately. Their eyes locked across the battlefield. Hers were the color of frozen seas, filled with an emotion Elias couldn't name. She advanced slowly, as though giving him time to run, but he didn't. The closer she came, the more he could see the details of her face. She was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, like a blade polished to a mirror shine. Her lips moved, speaking words in perfect human tongue, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Do you think I am a monster, human?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. For a moment, the sounds of war felt distant. Elias felt the eyes of both armies on him. His own men waited for his reply. The Zevrani soldiers stood still, their weapons lowered just enough to show they followed her lead. His answer could shape what happened next. The question was not about fear, it was about judgment. He saw it in her eyes. She wanted to know if he saw her as the enemy, or something more complicated. He could have lied. He could have called her a monster to rally his troops. But instead, he let honesty take over. "I think you are a leader who carries the weight of war," he said, his voice steady. "And I think you are more human than some I've met." For the first time, her composure shifted. Her gaze softened, and there was the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. Her soldiers exchanged glances, and Elias heard a low murmur among them. Before either side could move again, the hum in the air returned, louder this time. Both humans and Zevrani turned to see the horizon distort once more. Another fleet was arriving, but these ships bore no mark of the humans or the Zevrani. They were larger, darker, and their presence made the air feel heavier. The Queen's expression changed instantly from curiosity to alarm. She turned back to Elias, her voice sharper now. "We have no time for this fight," she said. "If you value your people, you will stand with me, not against me." The dark fleet descended with a silence more terrifying than the Zevrani's war cries. Their ships were black and jagged, shaped like claws reaching for the planet. Even the light from the sun seemed to fade around them. Elias had never seen such designs before. The Queen's soldiers shifted uneasily, their polished armor reflecting the growing shadow. It was clear these were not allies of either side. Elias kept his weapon ready, but did not aim it at the queen. She stood beside him now, her gaze fixed on the descending enemy. Her earlier poise was replaced by tense focus. "They are the Korth," she said, her voice low. "Raiders from beyond mapped space. They do not negotiate. They take worlds and burn what they cannot keep." The way she spoke told him this was not just a warning for his benefit. She was speaking as someone who had faced them before. The human soldiers, still tense from the battle with the Zevrani, exchanged glances. Some wanted to retreat to defend the colony. Others seemed unsure whether to trust their former enemy. Elias knew hesitation would get them all killed. "If we fight them together," he said to the queen, "we might have a chance." Her eyes flicked to his, searching for deception, but found none. She gave a single nod, and in that moment, the lines between their armies began to blur. The first Korth landing craft smashed into the surface, sending waves of dust and debris into the air. Their warriors emerged in heavy, angular armor, their movements mechanical and deliberate. They carried weapons that pulsed with a sickly green light. Without waiting for orders, they fired into the crowd, cutting down both humans and Zevrani. Without distinction, the queen's sword flashed as she leapt forward, striking with lethal precision. Elias followed, rallying his men to form a defensive wall. The fight was unlike anything Elias had experienced. The Korth were relentless, their armor absorbing most of the small arms' fire. Human rifles slowed them, but it took concentrated effort to bring even one down. The Zevrani's energy blades cut through them more easily, but the Korth struck back with shocking force. Elias saw one of the queen's guards slammed into a wall so hard his golden armor cracked. The air was filled with the smell of scorched metal and the shouts of warriors on both sides. At one point, Elias found himself back to back with the queen. She moved with such grace that it was hard to believe they had been enemies moments ago. Her blade sang as it cut through armor, and her voice carried over the clash of weapons. "Your people fight with courage," she said, almost as if surprised. Elias grunted, firing into a Korth warrior charging them. "Yours fight like they were born for this," he replied. For a moment, there was a strange understanding between them that had nothing to do with the battle. More Korth ships landed, and it became clear they were not here for resources alone. They were hunting. Elias noticed how they targeted specific fighters, those giving the most resistance. The queen must have seen it too, because she suddenly called out an order in her language. Her soldiers began moving in tight formations, protecting humans as if they were their own. It was a subtle shift, but it changed everything. For the first time, humans and Zevrani fought not as rivals, but as one force. In the middle of the chaos, Elias was almost cut down by a Korth warrior wielding a glowing blade. Before the strike could land, the queen stepped in, deflecting the blow and driving her sword through the attacker's chest. For a brief second, she was close enough for him to see the faint markings on her skin, like silver threads beneath the surface. She met his gaze and said, "You owe me one." Elias managed a breathless grin. "I'll pay you back." "Queen," he answered without hesitation. The battle raged on, but something had shifted inside Elias. The question she had asked earlier, whether he thought she was a monster, echoed in his mind. Seeing her fight, not just for her own people, but for his as well, made it impossible to see her as anything less than honorable. She was fierce, yes, but her strength came with a strange kind of mercy. And though the Korth were still coming, he realized they stood a better chance together than apart. The ground shook again as a much larger Korth vessel descended, its shadow swallowing the battlefield. The queen's expression hardened, and she glanced at Elias. "This is their war leader," she said. "If we bring him down, the rest may break." Elias tightened his grip on his weapon. "Then let's finish this," he replied. Around Humans and Zavrani tightened their ranks, ready for one final push against the invaders. The Korth war leader's vessel landed with a heavy, thunderous impact that shook the ground beneath both armies. Dust and heat rolled outward in a wave, making soldiers shield their eyes. The ship's hull was a blackened mass of jagged metal, etched with glowing red lines that pulsed like a heartbeat. From its central hatch, a towering figure emerged, clad in armor thicker than any Elias had seen. Even from a distance, the leader's presence was suffocating. The queen stepped forward without hesitation, her golden armor gleaming under the dimming sunlight. Her soldiers formed a protective circle around her, but she waved them aside. Elias recognized the move instantly. This was a challenge. The Korth leader raised a massive axe, its blade shimmering with that same sickly green energy the other warriors used. The air between them felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Elias knew this fight would decide more than just the battle. It would decide the survival of everyone on Velara Prime. The two warriors met in a clash that rang like a thunderclap across the battlefield. Sparks flew as sword met axe, each strike leaving small craters in the ground. The Korth leader's strength was overwhelming, but the queen moved with precision, turning raw power against itself. Elias kept his men focused on holding the line, preventing the lesser Korth from swarming their champion. Every eye was on the duel, and for a moment, even the sounds of gunfire seemed muted. The Korth leader swung with crushing force, but the queen ducked under the blow, her sword flashing upward to carve a deep line across his chest plate. The alien roared, retaliating with a backhand strike that sent her skidding across the ground. Elias felt his stomach twist as she staggered, but she recovered in a fluid motion, flipping to her feet with a glare that could cut steel. Her stance shifted, and Elias recognized the change. She was no longer testing him, she was fighting. To end this, she struck again, this time aiming for the joints in the enemy's armor. The Korth leader blocked the first blow, but her follow-up was faster than he could counter. The tip of her blade found its mark beneath his arm, and dark smoke hissed from the wound. He roared louder, swinging wildly now, his attacks losing rhythm. Elias felt hope rise in his chest. Around them, humans and Zavrani shouted encouragement in their own tongues, their voices merging into a single defiant sound. But victory was never that simple. The Korth leader slammed his foot into the ground, releasing a shockwave that sent the queen to one knee. He raised his axe for a killing blow. Without thinking, Elias broke from his line and charged forward. He knew it was reckless. He knew it might get him killed. But in that moment, all he saw was her in danger, and all he felt was the need to stop it. He fired his rifle in short, precise bursts, aiming for the exposed sections of the leader's armor. One shot found its mark in the gap at the back of the neck, and the Korth leader staggered. The queen seized the moment, spinning upward and driving her sword deep into his chest. The sound was like metal tearing under enormous pressure, and then the leader fell, the green light fading from his weapon. The battlefield went silent except for the heavy breathing of the survivors. The remaining Korth warriors froze. Some stepped back, others dropped their weapons entirely. The loss of their leader had shattered their will to fight. The queen straightened, her blade dripping with dark fluid, and looked at Elias. "You interfered," she said, her tone unreadable. Elias, still catching his breath, replied, "You're welcome." For a moment, her eyes lingered on him, and then she gave the smallest nod. The kind of nod that carried meaning without words. Around them, soldiers from both sides began tending to the wounded. Human medics worked alongside Zavrani healers, passing supplies and sharing tools. The air felt different now. The tension that had existed between their people was not gone, but it had shifted. They had fought together, bled together, and that meant something that could not be erased easily. Elias watched as the queen gave quiet orders to her guards, her posture still regal but less guarded than before. When she approached him again, Her voice was calm but deliberate. "This war between our people may not be over," she said. "But today, we share a victory." Elias nodded, understanding more than her words admitted. "Then let's make sure it means something," he replied. She studied him for a moment. Longer, and then turned away to oversee her troops, the golden light of the setting sun catching in her silver-white hair like fire. The aftermath of the battle left, the land scarred and quiet. Smoke curled from craters, and the metallic scent of burnt weapons lingered in the air. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows over the broken ground. Humans and Zivrani moved through the wreckage, gathering their wounded and securing the area. It was the first time Elias had seen their two forces working side by side. Without hostility, the queen moved among her soldiers, speaking to each with a calm authority. They bowed their heads when she passed, their respect for her clear in every gesture. Elias kept his distance at first, unsure if his presence would be welcome. But she glanced over her shoulder and motioned for him to follow. He obeyed, stepping carefully through the debris as they walked toward the edge of the battlefield, where the largest crater still smoldered. "This is where their main power core landed," she said, pointing to the scorched earth. If the Korth had time to activate it, the entire colony would have been lost. Elias studied the remains, a twisted heap of black metal that still gave off faint heat. He could see now how close they had come to total destruction. "You've fought them before," he said quietly. She did not look at him but answered with a simple nod. "They do not stop until everything is ash," she replied. "My people learned that lesson long ago." Her tone carried weight, a quiet pain beneath the strength. Elias wondered how many battles she had fought and how many worlds she had seen fall. She turned to face him fully, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "You fight with instinct, human. You saved my life today. That is not something I forget easily." Elias met her gaze without flinching, sensing there was more to her words than gratitude. Before he could answer, a runner from her guard approached, speaking quickly in the Zivrani tongue. The queen's expression shifted to one of concern. She dismissed the guard and turned back to Elias. "Scouts report more Korth ships on the far side of the planet," she said. "They are regrouping." Elias felt his jaw tighten. "Then we hit them before they hit us," he replied. She gave him a small, approving look, as though his answer matched her own thoughts. They gathered both armies in the open plaza of the Puza of the Kuntla human colony. Elias stood beside the queen as they addressed the mixed ranks of soldiers. The humans listened in respectful silence as she spoke in her own language, and the Zivrani stood still as Elias translated orders for his troops. It was strange to see the two groups standing together, but there was no mistaking the shared determination in their faces. Whatever they had been before today, they were allies now. As preparations began, Elias noticed how the queen moved among his men, asking brief questions and listening to their answers. She inspected their weapons with genuine interest, nodding at certain designs and suggesting adjustments for efficiency. Some soldiers looked uneasy at first, but her calm manner quickly put them at ease. Elias realized she was earning their trust not with titles or commands, but with actions that proved she valued their strength. When night fell, the combined force set out toward the far ridge where the scouts had spotted the Korth. The landscape was rough, dotted with jagged rocks and low hills that cast deep shadows in the moonlight. Elias walked near the queen, their pace steady but cautious. She carried her sword at her side, the golden blade catching stray glints of light. There was no conversation between them for a long while, only the sound of boots on stone and the quiet hum of distant energy weapons being readied. At the top of the ridge, they halted. Below them, in a shallow valley, the Korth camp glowed with an eerie green light. Dozens of their ships were arranged in a tight circle, guarded by patrols that moved in precise patterns. The queen crouched low, studying their movements. They are preparing for a larger assault, she said. If they launch together, we cannot stop them. Elias scanned the camp and nodded grimly. Then we make sure they never launch, he answered. Her eyes met his in the dim light, and for a moment, there was no war, only a shared understanding. Between two leaders who had seen enough death to last a lifetime. She reached out, touching the edge of his shoulder armor lightly, almost as if sealing an unspoken pact. Then she turned back to her soldiers, her voice carrying across the ridge. With a sharp clarity, "We strike now," she commanded, and every fighter on the ridge readied for the charge. The moment the order to strike was given, both humans and Zavrani surged forward down the ridge. The night air filled with the sound of boots pounding the earth and the hum of weapons charging. Green light from the Korth camp spilled across the valley, throwing long shadows that danced with the advancing force. Elias kept his eyes on the Queen, matching her pace as they led the charge together. The Korth patrols reacted instantly, their weapons firing streaks of energy into the dark. Bolts of sickly green lit up the hillside, but the combined force kept moving. Humans returned fire in disciplined bursts, while Zavrani warriors closed the distance with their glowing blades. Elias could feel the heat of passing shots and the thud of impacts around him, but he pushed forward. The Queen moved like a streak of gold through the chaos, her sword cutting a path straight to the enemy lines. They crashed into the camp with the force of a storm. Tents tore apart under the blast of grenades, and Korth soldiers scrambled to regroup. Elias fought with precision, conserving ammunition and aiming for weak points in the armor. Beside him, the Queen's strikes were fluid and lethal, each movement purposeful. They fought not as separate warriors, but as two halves of the same assault. The unity between their people in this moment was unlike anything either side had seen before. A cluster of Korth soldiers broke away, heading for a central ship that pulsed with brighter light than the rest. Elias noticed it immediately. "That's their command hub," he shouted to the Queen. She glanced at it, nodded once, and without hesitation, they veered toward it. The defenders were heavier here, their armor reinforced, their weapons more dangerous. Every step forward was bought with sweat, effort, and the risk of falling under enemy fire. Reaching the command hub, they found its entrance heavily guarded. The Queen motioned for Elias to cover her as she advanced. He laid down suppressive fire while she moved in close, her blade finding the narrow gaps in the enemy's armor. Within moments, the guards fell, and she kicked the heavy hatch open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burning metal and ozone. Panels lined the walls, glowing with alien symbols and shifting maps. A Korth officer inside turned, startled by their sudden entry. He lunged for a control panel, but Elias was faster, shooting the weapon from his hand. The Queen closed the distance in 2 strides, slamming him against the wall with the flat of her blade at his throat. "Shut it down," she demanded. "The Funjo." Officer snarled something in his language, refusing. Without looking away from him, she said to Elias, "Hold him. I'll deal with the system." Elias stepped in, gripping the officer's armor firmly. The Queen's fingers flew over the controls, her movements quick and deliberate. Symbols shifted from green to red, alarms beginning to sound across the camp. Outside, the tide of battle started to change as Korth formations broke apart in confusion. The humans and Zavrani pressed harder, sensing the weakening coordination. Elias could hear the difference in the gunfire, more controlled on their side, more frantic from the enemy. The Queen stepped back from the console, satisfaction in her eyes. "It's done," she said, her voice calm but edged with resolve. "Their command network is crippled. They will scatter now." Elias looked at her and allowed himself a brief smile. "Good," he said. "Let's make sure they don't come back." She gave a short nod, and together they left the hub, moving back into the fray. The Korth officer they left behind slumped against the wall, defeated, as the sound of retreating forces grew louder outside. In the open, The shift was clear. Without central orders, the Korth soldiers fought without coordination. Some fled toward their ships, others fought in isolated groups, easily surrounded and taken down. Elias and the Queen moved through the camp, rallying their soldiers to press the advantage. Explosions lit up the night as key enemy vessels were destroyed before they could lift off. The green glow of the camp began to fade as the Korth presence dwindled. When the final shot was fired and the last of the enemy fled, a heavy silence fell over the battlefield. Fires crackled in the distance, casting a warm light over the weary but victorious soldiers. Elias stood beside the Queen, breathing hard, both of them scanning the horizon for any sign of a counterattack. None came. She turned to him, her expression unreadable for a moment, before saying quietly, "You fight as though my battle is your own." Elias met her gaze and replied simply, "Tonight, it was." The victory brought relief, but it did not erase the cost. The valley was littered with the remains of both Korth machines and the bodies of fallen soldiers from both sides. Smoke curled into the night sky, mingling with the faint scent of burned fuel. Medics moved quickly, tending to the wounded where they lay. The glow of emergency lamps cast long shadows across the ground, giving the scene a haunting stillness. Despite the quiet triumph, Elias walked among his men, checking on those who had fought closest to him. He offered words of encouragement to the injured and gave silent nods of respect to those who had lost friends. The faces he saw were tired, but there was a spark in their eyes, a shared understanding that they had done something important. This was not just survival. This was proof that humans and Zevrani could stand together when it mattered. The Queen moved through her own ranks with the same deliberate grace. Her soldiers bowed their heads as she passed, their loyalty to her stronger than ever. She stopped to speak with a wounded guard, kneeling beside him and resting a hand on his shoulder. Her voice was soft, but her presence carried authority. Elias watched her from a distance, noticing the way she balanced strength and compassion. In every gesture, when their paths crossed again, she regarded him for a moment before speaking. "You have earned more than my respect, human," she said. "You have earned my trust." Elias felt the weight of her words. Trust was not something given lightly between their people. He nodded in acknowledgement, unsure what to say that would carry the same meaning. She seemed to understand, allowing silence to fill the space between them before she continued on her way. Later, in the central command tent set up on the ridge, humans and Zevrani officers met to discuss their next moves. The Korth threat had been driven back, but scouts reported scattered forces still moving across the planet. The Queen stood at the head of the table, flanked by her guards. Elias sat across from her, maps spread out between them. Their discussion was calm but direct, each offering strategies and countermeasures as if they had been allies for years. "We strike at dawn," the Queen concluded. "We remove what remains before they can regroup." Her voice left no room for doubt. Elias agreed. "We'll send 2 squads ahead to scout and mark positions. No risks we don't need to take." She gave him a small, approving nod. The exchange was brief, but it carried the easy rhythm of 2 leaders who had learned to think on the same wavelength. When the meeting ended, Elias stepped outside into the cool night air. Stars spread across the sky in sharp clarity, undimmed by the lights of the camp. The quiet felt strange after the noise of battle. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see the Queen approaching without her helmet. Her silver-white hair caught the faint light, making it shimmer like strands of ice. For the first time, her expression seemed free of the weight of command. "You looked ready to die back there," she said, stopping beside him. "Why?" Her question was not an accusation, but genuine curiosity. Elias took a moment before answering. "Because if I didn't act, you would have fallen. And I couldn't let that happen." She studied him closely, her eyes narrowing just slightly, as though measuring the truth of his words. "You speak as though my life matters to you." She said quietly, "It does," he replied without hesitation. The answer seemed to catch her off guard. Her gaze softened, and for a moment, the battlefield felt far away. "Among my people," she said, "it is rare to hear such honesty in war." Elias gave a small smile. "Among mine, it is rare to fight beside someone who changes what you believe." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke and metal from the valley below, but the moment between them remained unbroken. She turned her face toward the stars, her voice low but clear. "When this war ends, there will be those who will not accept what we have done here. They will call it weakness. They will call it betrayal." Elias followed her gaze, his own voice steady. "Then let them call it what they want. We'll know the truth." She looked at him again, and this time there was no mistaking the small, genuine smile that touched her lips. The first light of dawn spilled across the ridge, painting the battlefield in shades of gold and gray. Soldiers from both sides stirred, gathering weapons and preparing for the final push against the remaining Korth forces. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp soil and cooling metal. Elias tightened the straps on his armor, feeling the familiar weight settle against his shoulders. Today, there would be no holding back. The queen emerged from her tent, already clad in her golden armor. Her presence drew the attention of everyone nearby. She moved with the calm confidence of a leader who knew what had to be done. Her gaze swept across the assembled troops, pausing briefly when it met Elias's. No words passed between them, but the acknowledgement in her eyes was enough. They both knew this battle would decide more than just the fate of the planet. The march to the Korth's last position began in silence. The terrain was harsher here, with jagged rocks jutting from the ground and deep cracks running through the earth. Scouts moved ahead, signaling the safest paths. Elias walked beside the queen, scanning the horizon for movement. Every so often, they would pass the wreckage of Korth machinery, its once glowing panels now dark. Each ruin was a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. As they neared the valley where the Korth were gathered, the low hum of enemy engines reached their ears. The sound grew louder, joined by the clatter of metal and the muffled shouts of alien voices. From the ridge above, the view revealed the enemy camp. It was smaller than before, but fortified, with barricades of scavenged armor plating and mounted weapons aimed at the valley approaches. The queen studied it carefully before speaking. "They will fight to the last," she said. Elias nodded, his eyes narrowing on the largest ship at the camp's center. "That's their escape craft," he said. "If they launch it, they can return with reinforcements." The queen's jaw tightened. "Then we ensure it never leaves the ground." Orders were passed quickly, dividing their combined force into 3 groups. Humans with long-range rifles took positions on the surrounding ridges, while Zevrani warriors prepared for a direct assault. The plan was simple but dangerous. The attack began with a coordinated barrage from the ridges. Rifle fire rained down on the Korth positions, forcing them to take cover. In the chaos, the queen led the central assault, her golden armor gleaming under the morning light. Elias was at her side, moving in sync as if they had fought together for years. The clash was immediate and brutal. Korth defenders met them head-on, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. Every strike and shot was met with equal force. Inside the camp, the fighting was tight and relentless. Elias cut down an enemy blocking their path to the escape ship, while the queen's blade struck with flawless precision. They moved as one, covering each other's flanks and pressing forward despite the heavy resistance. The roar of battle was all around them, a mix of human shouts, Zevrani war cries, and the harsh metallic screeches of the Korth. Step by step, they closed in on their target. Reaching the base of the escape craft, they found it guarded by a unit of elite Korth soldiers. Their armor was thicker, and their weapons struck harder. Elias ducked under a blade and countered with a burst from his rifle, while the queen engaged 2 enemies at once. Her movements were a blur of gold and silver, every strike finding a weak point. Still, the enemy did not falter easily. It took both of them working together to bring the last guard down. With the path clear, Elias planted explosives along the ship's landing struts while the queen kept watch. Her eyes scanned the battlefield, ready for any sign of a counterattack. When the charges were set, Elias signaled to pull back. They retreated to cover just as the explosives detonated. The blast shook the ground, sending fire and twisted metal into the air. The escape craft collapsed onto its side, smoke pouring from its ruptured hull. The sight broke the remaining Korth's morale. Some dropped their weapons, while others fled into the rocky hills. The queen raised her sword high, signaling the final push. Within minutes, the last resistance was crushed. The valley fell silent, except for the steady breath of exhausted soldiers. Elias stood beside the queen, looking out over the smoking wreckage. "It's over," he said. She turned her gaze to him, her voice soft but certain. "For now, human, it is." The battlefield was quiet now, the sounds of war replaced by the rustle of wind through the valley. Smoke drifted in thin trails toward the brightening sky where the sun climbed steadily above the horizon. Soldiers moved among the wreckage, gathering weapons and helping the wounded to the medics. The stench of scorched metal still hung in the air, but the sharp edge of fear had faded. Victory had been earned, and it showed on every face. Elias stood at the edge of the destroyed escape craft, looking at the twisted remains. The charges had done their job well. There would be no reinforcements from the Korth today. He could hear his men laughing in relief a short distance away, sharing the kind of camaraderie that only came from surviving a battle together. It was a sound he had not heard since before the war began, and it reminded him what they had been fighting for. The queen approached quietly, her golden armor bearing fresh scratches and dark stains. She stopped beside him, her gaze fixed on the wreckage. "This was their last chance to regain control," she said. "Now they will scatter, and my people will hunt them until they are no more." Her tone carried no arrogance, only the steady certainty of a leader who had seen too many campaigns. Elias nodded, knowing her words were true. They walked together toward the center of the camp, where the combined forces had gathered. Humans and Zevrani stood side by side, no longer separated by suspicion. There was an unspoken understanding, now built on the blood they had spilled together. As they approached, the soldiers straightened, their conversations falling quiet. The queen raised her voice so all could hear. "Today we have shown that unity is stronger than any enemy," she said. Elias followed with his own words for the humans, translating her message and adding his thanks. He told them that their courage had not only saved the colony, but had also forged an alliance no one thought possible. His voice carried over the camp, steady and proud. When he finished, the air filled with cheers from both species. It was not the celebration of victory alone, it was the recognition of a shared future worth fighting for. Later, when the troops had dispersed to rest, Elias found himself near the outer edge of the camp. The queen was there, standing alone, looking toward the horizon. The light of the setting sun painted her armor in warm tones, softening the sharp lines of her figure. She turned when she heard his footsteps, her expression unreadable at first. "When we first met," she said, "I asked you if you thought I was a monster." "I remember," Elias said, stopping beside her. "And I told you the truth." She studied him for a long moment, the silence stretching between them like a bridge neither had crossed before. Then she spoke again, her voice softer. "Your answer changed something in me. You saw more than an enemy, and that has made me see more than a rival when I look at you." Her words were not ceremonial or formal. They were personal. Elias felt the weight of her statement and met it with his own honesty. "You've changed something in me too. I've fought alongside many, but none like you. You lead with strength, but also with something rarer on her. The queen's gaze softened, and a faint warmth reached her eyes. She stepped closer, the space between them narrowing until he could see the fine silver patterns on her skin, catching the last rays of sunlight. For a moment, they stood in quiet understanding, the war and its noise far away. Around them, the camp prepared for the coming days, but here, there was only this moment. The queen's lips curved in the smallest of smiles, and she said, "Then perhaps human, I am not the monster I once thought I was." Elias returned her smile. "No," he said, his voice steady. "You are something far greater." The wind shifted, carrying the sound of distant voices calling orders and the crackle of campfires being lit. The queen glanced back toward her people, then to Elias one last time. "When history remembers, this day, let it say we chose unity over hatred," she said. He nodded, his reply simple but certain, "It will." And together, they turned toward the camp, walking side by side into a future neither had imagined at the start of this war.